There comes a moment in every person's life when they look in the mirror and realize the reflection staring back is not their enemy. The real enemy lives deeper, in the quiet places of the mind, where excuses grow like weeds. But there is also something else there, something older and stronger, a voice that refuses to die. It whispers one question that can change the entire direction of a life. What if today is the day you stop being who you have been and finally become who you were meant to be? Part 1. Evan Carter had asked himself that question more times than he cared to admit. At 32, he knew the routine too well. Every morning he stood in front of the mirror and promised himself that today would be different. He told himself he would rise earlier, speak with more purpose, hold his temper, and finish every task he started. But every night, the old habits crept quietly back into command and the promise faded like a forgotten dream. It was not that Evan lacked desire. He had desire. He had ambition. What he lacked was the one ingredient all great men discover in their private battles. He lacked the decision to begin again every day, especially on the days when he felt the least ready. That was the truth Napoleon Hill had written about so many years ago. Progress did not come from a single heroic act. It came from a collection of small victories, stacked quietly, day after day, until they built a mind capable of commanding circumstances instead of obeying them. Evan learned this truth the hard way. On a cold November morning, he sat in his small apartment, staring at the half-written goals he had scribbled the night before. The room was silent except for the ticking clock on the wall. He felt that familiar heaviness in his chest, the weight of knowing he wanted more but not knowing how to become the person capable of reaching it. He thought success came from some grand breakthrough, some dramatic turning point. But life had been teaching him a quieter lesson, one he had ignored for years. The difference between greatness and mediocrity was invisible at first. It was made in the decisions a person made when no one watched. As he sat there, something inside him shifted. It was not excitement. It was not motivation. It was something much stronger. It was a decision. He whispered to himself, "I am done waiting to feel ready. I begin today." At first, the decision felt small, almost insignificant. But Hill had warned that the mind is shaped by the agreements a man makes with himself. Evan had made thousands of small agreements with comfort, and each one had weakened him. Now, he made a new agreement. He would not wait for inspiration. He would train himself to act. He would treat discipline as a doorway instead of a prison. He remembered a time in his childhood before life softened him, before the world taught him that comfort was safety, before he learned that every feeling demanded a response. He remembered running through the fields behind his grandfather's house, fearless and unbroken. Back then, he was untamed. He was not polished, but he was real. Somewhere along the journey, he had put that strength down. Not because life crushed him, but because it offered him enough ease to make him comfortable. Hill once wrote that most people surrender not through pain but through pleasure. Evan saw the truth of that in himself. Comfort had been whispering to him for years. Rest a little longer. Try again tomorrow. You deserve a break. And slowly, without realizing it, he had begun to drift. He had let his moods decide his direction. He waited for fear to fade. He waited for motivation to rise. He waited for some signal that he was finally ready. But readiness never came. And that morning, something inside him finally admitted what he had always known. He was not born to float through his days. He was born to be forged. Forging was never supposed to feel easy. It happened under pressure, under heat, under fire. The strongest minds were built the same way steel was built, through resistance and repetition. Evan rose from his chair and walked to the mirror. He looked at himself, not with frustration but with clarity. This was his one life, and he had spent too much of it obeying the flow. The flow was where potential went to die. It led to wasted years and a life lived in currents he never chose. He remembered Hill's teaching. A man becomes whatever he tolerates. The more he tolerates weakness in thought and action, the more it writes itself into his identity. He asked himself a simple question. What have I been tolerating? The answer was uncomfortable, but it was honest. He had been tolerating his own reactivity. He had been tolerating his own excuses. He had been tolerating a version of himself he no longer respected. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply as if preparing to meet an older, stronger version of himself that had been waiting in the dark. That version did not fear discomfort. He hunted it. He knew discomfort sharpened him. Discomfort stripped away illusion and forced growth. Every person Evan admired had been shaped by discomfort, by early mornings, by the discipline to rise while the world slept, by choices that cost them something, and he realized something else. Comfort was not his friend. Comfort was a cage dressed up as kindness. It kept him tame. It stole his fire one small surrender at a time. It convinced him that boredom was suffering and that pain was a signal to stop. But the truth was simpler. Pain was a teacher. Discomfort was the call to become something more. He whispered to himself, "Today I begin the work. Not when it feels good. Not when I feel inspired. Every day, especially when it hurts." This was his summons. This was the beginning of his transformation. And as he stood there, he felt something powerful awaken inside him, something that had been asleep for far too long. He felt the return of the man he was meant to be. This was the first small victory, but it would not be the last. If you want part 2, just say, "Send part 2." Engaging hook. There comes a point when a person realizes that the life they are living is far smaller than the life they were built for. Not because fate denied them, but because comfort seduced them. In that moment, a quiet truth rises inside the soul. No one is coming. The rescue you pray for is not arriving. And strangely enough, that truth does not break you. It frees you. It gives you back every ounce of power you once gave away. Part 2. Evan Carter felt that truth pressing in on him as he walked home from work on a gray January afternoon. Snow drifted along the sidewalk, turning the world soft and muted. Yet inside his chest, something sharp was forming, something that refused to be softened by the cold or the quiet. All day, he had watched people move in the same tired rhythm he once followed. They lived in comfortable cycles, predictable patterns, never questioning why their fire grew dimmer each year. Napoleon Hill once wrote that the greatest enemy of human greatness is not fear or failure but comfort. Comfort disguises itself as kindness. It tells a man he deserves rest before he has earned it. It convinces him that discipline is a punishment. Evan had lived inside that trap for years. He had called softness self-care. He had convinced himself that the lack of progress in his life was simply bad luck and not the direct result of his choices. But now something inside him rebelled. Comfort was the enemy precisely because it did not look like one. It did not shove him. It invited him. It wrapped around him like a warm blanket and whispered that everything would be fine if he simply stopped trying so hard. And with every year he accepted that whisper, his instincts grew weaker. He stopped expecting more from himself. He stopped fighting for the future he once imagined. He let himself shrink. He walked slowly, breathing in the cold evening air. The cold stung his face, but it also woke him up. A fire does not grow in still air. It needs friction. It needs oxygen. It needs commitment. Evan realized he had been suffocating his own flame with comfort. If he wanted to feel alive again, he had to step out of that cage and face the sharp edge of discomfort. He reached his apartment and sat in the silence of his small living room. For the first time in years, he did not reach for distraction. He let himself feel the weight of his own life. Hill had taught that a man must face truth before he can change. The truth was painful but simple. Evan had been waiting for someone to save him. He wanted someone to notice his struggle. He wanted someone to step into his darkness and pull him back into the light. But no one had come. And no one ever would. At first that realization felt cruel. It felt like abandonment. But slowly, something began to shift. If no one was coming, then he no longer had to wait. He no longer had to depend on circumstances or people or timing. He could begin now, not with hope that someone would save him, but with the certainty that he could save himself. Evan remembered the years he spent trying to hide his battles. He remembered the silent war he waged inside his own mind every night. No one else had heard those thoughts. No one else had felt the sting of breaking his own promises. No one else knew the disappointment that lived behind his calm expression. This was his war, and it always had been. Hill wrote that the world does not reward suffering. The world rewards resilience. Life does not hand out mercy because a man pleads or because he has suffered enough. Life responds to action. It responds to courage. It responds to the one who rises again and again when logic says he should stay down. Evan closed his eyes and saw himself clearly, for the first time in years. He saw the parts of him that were strong and the parts he had allowed to grow weak. And he realized something powerful. The strength he had been searching for was not in a mentor or a book or a lucky break. It was in the mirror. It was in the eyes of the man who had survived every disappointment, every setback, every storm. The man who was still standing. He whispered to himself, "You are all you have. And that is enough." At that moment, something began to change. Accepting full responsibility did not crush him. It lifted him. It cleared the fog he had been living in. The path in front of him did not suddenly become easier, but he no longer felt lost. He no longer felt at the mercy of circumstances. He no longer wanted a rescue. He wanted resolve. The storm that surrounded him did not soften. But he began to understand that the purpose of life was not to escape the storm. It was to learn how to walk through it, head up, eyes forward, unbreakable. As he sat there, thoughts began to swirl in his mind. He replayed the moments when he blamed others for his struggles, the moments when he cursed circumstances, the moments when he felt the world owed him something. But a deeper truth stepped forward. The real battle was not out there. It never had been. It was inside him. It was the war between his discipline and his impulses. Between the man he wanted to become and the man he had allowed himself to be. Between his vision and his excuses. Most men never win that war. They spend their lives fighting shadows, blaming their boss, blaming their bank account, blaming everyone but themselves. They never engage the only battle that matters, the battle inside their own minds. Evan felt the weight of that truth settle inside him, not as a burden but as a challenge. He stood up and walked to the window. The city lights flickered below. For the first time, he felt something like clarity. The world outside was not his enemy. His own reactions were. His own habits were. His own surrender to emotion was. He whispered, "This is the war. And I will fight it." He knew the transformation would not come from a grand gesture. It would come from small, relentless acts of discipline when no one was watching. It would come from choosing what needed to be done every day until the doing of it rewired his identity from the inside out. He felt the beginning of a new strength. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady and real. The kind of strength that builds leaders. The kind of strength Hill spoke about, the strength found not in comfort but in challenge. Evan closed his eyes and breathed in deeply. He had finally accepted the truth. No one was coming. And that was his greatest gift. He could begin now. If you want part 3, just say, "Send part 3. Engaging hook. There is a moment when a man realizes that the battle that decides everything in his life is not happening in the world around him, but in the space behind his eyes. The mind is the throne. Whoever controls it controls everything. But most people never take that throne. They surrender it to emotion, to habit, to fear. If you want to rise, if you want to build something unshakable, you must stop living as a servant to feeling and start living as a master of your own mind." Part 3. Evan Carter stared at his reflection early one morning. The world was still dark outside. The city had not yet begun its endless noise. In that quiet moment, he heard a truth that felt ancient, a truth Napoleon Hill had repeated through every lesson. You cannot rule anything until you learn to rule your mind. Evan had spent most of his life letting his emotions run the show. He believed they were sacred. He believed they were signals from some deeper place. When he was angry, he acted in anger. When he felt tired, he collapsed into rest he had not earned. When he felt discouraged, he walked away from his responsibilities. He had lived at the mercy of whatever wind happened to blow through him. His life reflected it. A storm without structure. But now his reflection was different. His eyes looked clearer, more aware. He whispered to himself, "You cannot lead anyone if you cannot lead yourself. And you cannot lead yourself if your moods lead you." He felt a strange strength rise inside him. He saw how often he had waged war with his own thoughts. He had attacked himself more violently than the world ever had. The real enemy, the one that mattered, lived inside him. If he could win that war, there would be nothing left to fear. He sat on the edge of his bed and closed his eyes. His emotions came like they always did. Anger, fear, doubt, weariness. But this time, he did not let them take the throne. He watched them like passing visitors. They spoke, but he no longer bowed. He told himself, "Emotion may visit me, but it will not rule me. Napoleon Hill once wrote that emotions can be powerful servants and dangerous masters. They can help a man, but only if he decides their place. For years, Evan had let them decide his direction. He had mistaken feeling for truth. Modern culture had trained him to trust whatever he felt. Honor your emotions, people said. Listen to them. Follow them. But no one had warned him that emotions can lie. They can trick a man into surrendering his greatness for temporary comfort. They can turn discipline into a burden and weakness into a lifestyle. Now he felt the danger clearly. Anger could blind him. Fear could shrink his world until he was too scared to move. Sadness could steal months of his life while pretending to care for him. These emotions were not kings. They were guests. Some brought warnings. Others brought poison. He had to treat them accordingly. A weak man obeys every emotion. Evan remembered how often he had done that. One day he felt inspired and he worked hard. The next day he felt discouraged and he gave up. His life rose and fell with every mood. He had been tossed back and forth like a small boat in a storm. One day determined, the next shattered. Never stable. Never in control. But the man who builds, the man who leads, the man who becomes unbreakable, does not ask himself how he feels when he wakes. He asks what must be done. That was the difference between a life of meaning and a life wasted in reaction. Evan stood and walked to the bathroom sink. He splashed cold water on his face and stared at himself again. A new clarity took shape. Real does not mean right. Just because an emotion is felt does not mean it deserves obedience. It deserved acknowledgement but not control. He whispered, I will feel everything, but I will obey nothing except my purpose. Outside, a faint glow began to rise in the horizon. Morning was approaching. Evan knew this was the most important window of the day. The beginning. The fragile moment when the mind was soft, impressionable, open. Hill believed the first thoughts of the day shape the entire day. If a man does not command his morning, the world will command it for him. News, opinions, distractions, noise, everything waiting to take control before he has found his center. Evan refused to let the world take the first victory. He walked into the shower and turned on the cold water. His breath caught instantly, but he did not flinch. He stepped in because he had promised himself he would. This was the first test of the day. The first declaration. He wanted to wake the mind with discipline, not with comfort. He let the cold water strike him as if it were chiseling away the old version of himself. He breathed slowly. He stayed present. He stayed strong. And in that moment, he realized something important. Discipline is not about suffering. It is about ruling the mind. Each act of discipline was like taking back territory he had lost to emotion. He stepped out of the shower and stood still for a moment. The quiet inside him felt powerful. He recognized that the man who owns his morning owns his mind, and the man who owns his mind owns his day. If he controlled his day repeatedly, he would eventually control his life. He dressed and sat at his small kitchen table. The world was still dark. The silence felt sacred. He spoke softly to himself, this is the blueprint for greatness. I build my mind before the world touches it. As he drank water and prepared his thoughts for the day, another idea surfaced. Something he had ignored for years. Praise. The memory of it. He remembered the first time someone had praised him deeply. He remembered the warmth that surged through him, the sense of sudden importance, the soft thrill of approval. For a moment it felt pure, like encouragement. But afterward, he had found himself craving it. He started working not for excellence but for applause. He began measuring his progress not by who he became but by who approved. It had made him soft. It had made him dependent. It had made him weak. Praise had become a sedative. He whispered, the moment you need approval, you lose your freedom. Napoleon Hill taught that a man must act from inner standards, not from applause. If praise becomes the fuel, character collapses. A man forgets who he is when the world is not clapping. Evan felt the truth in his chest. He remembered all the times he had tried to impress others, all the times he let praise shape his identity. He had let compliments become chains. But now he understood. He was what he did when no one watched. He was the habits he kept in silence. He was the man he was before sunrise, alone, without applause, without validation. He closed his eyes, breathed in deeply, and felt something inside him harden into resolve. Today, I lead my mind. Today, I begin with discipline. Today, I rise above emotion. Today, I build myself, not for praise but for purpose. The morning light slowly filled the room. Evan stood, steady and calm. The war inside him would not end today. It might not end for years. But he was finally fighting it. He was ruling his mind one choice at a time. And that was enough for greatness to begin. If you want part 4, just say, send part 4. Engaging hook. There comes a moment in every person's journey when life asks a question that cannot be avoided. It does not whisper. It does not knock gently. It arrives like a quiet force and stands in front of you waiting. The question is simple. Will you continue living by habit, emotion, and reaction, or will you finally rise and take command of the life that belongs to you? That moment becomes the turning point. It becomes the hour when average minds break and stronger minds begin to form. And in that moment you are about to step into the next stage of your own transformation. Part 4. The morning brought a new stillness, the kind of silence that feels almost sacred. It wrapped around him like a soft blanket as he opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. For the first time he did not rush into the day. He did not grab his phone. He did not think about what needed to be done. Instead, he let the quiet settle inside him. Then a single thought rose from that silence. It is time to lead myself. He sat up slowly. The air felt different, almost charged. Napoleon Hill often wrote about the importance of a burning desire, of building a mental blueprint strong enough to move mountains. That morning he realized that the blueprint is not built in busy hours or loud moments. It is built in silence at the beginning of the day when the world has not yet placed its weight on your shoulders. He stood and walked to the bathroom. The water in the sink was cold as he splashed it on his face. A small shock ran through him, a reminder that he was alive and capable. As he looked into the mirror, he did not ask, "How do I feel today?" That question had controlled him for too long. Instead, he asked, "What must be done today to move forward?" That question sparked a new kind of energy inside him. Not the temporary rush that comes from inspiration, but the stable fire that comes from purpose. He remembered something Hill wrote. Every great leader first learns to lead his own thoughts. And so he began the morning with a small ritual. He straightened his posture. He breathed slow, deep breaths. He stood still for a moment and repeated a simple truth. I am in control of my mind. My mind is not in control of me. It felt unnatural at first, almost stiff. But everything strong begins awkwardly. Every discipline begins with resistance. He refused to let that discomfort pull him back into old habits. He had spent too many years letting emotions shape his actions. Now he needed to shape his emotions with conscious direction. He walked into the kitchen and made a simple breakfast while the sun began to rise outside. The golden light spilling through the window reminded him that each day is a fresh canvas. You either paint what you want or let someone else paint it for you. He had lived too long letting the world choose his colors. From this day on, he would choose them himself. After eating, he opened his journal. The blank page stared back at him. Most people fear empty pages because they do not know what to write. But he knew that the first step to leading the mind is giving it clear orders. So he began with 3 questions that had the power to shape his entire day. What do I want? Why do I want it? What must I do today to move toward it? He wrote slowly at first. Then faster. Soon the page held a simple but powerful roadmap. Something changed as he wrote. Clarity replaced confusion. Focus replaced noise. He felt a strength that did not depend on motivation or mood. It came from certainty. It came from choosing the direction of his own life. When he finished writing, he took a deep breath and felt a sense of conviction rising inside him. He understood now that emotions would try to interrupt him throughout the day. Doubts would visit him. Fear would whisper. Old habits would tempt him. But none of them had the authority to lead unless he handed them the keys. He remembered another principle from Hill. Control your mind or your mind will control you. That truth struck him harder now than ever. He realized that the real battle was not with the world. It was not with circumstances. It was not with difficult people or heavy responsibilities. It was with himself. And if he could win the battle within, the battle outside would feel small by comparison. He stepped outside and felt the cool morning air hit his face. The city around him was beginning to wake up. Cars moved. People hurried. Life buzzed with its usual distractions. But he walked calmly, with purpose. For the first time in years he felt like the leader of his own day. Small challenges tried to shake him. A rude driver honked at him. A message on his phone pulled at his attention. A worry tried to crawl into his mind. But instead of reacting automatically, he paused. He breathed. He reminded himself, I am the one choosing how I respond. That single pause changed everything. It cut the chain between emotion and reaction. It placed decision back in his hands. It transformed the day from something that happened to him into something he shaped himself. Later at work, he felt stress rising when a problem appeared on his desk. The old version of himself would have panicked or procrastinated. But the new version leaned into clarity. He asked the same question he practiced in the morning. What must be done right now? And he did it without waiting to feel ready. That decision brought a sense of power he had never felt before. Not the loud kind. Not the showy kind. It was quiet, solid, steady. It was the power of self-command. As the day passed, he realized the truth that Napoleon Hill had hinted at again and again. Success is not something a man finds. It is something he becomes. And becoming requires internal order, clarity, purpose, discipline, the willingness to act even when emotions resist. He returned home that evening tired but proud. Not because everything went perfectly, but because he had remained the leader of his mind. He had made choices based on purpose, not impulses. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt like he was truly becoming the man he was meant to be. He understood now that mastery does not appear in a single dramatic moment. It is built in small victories. Every morning. Every choice. Every act of discipline. Every time you lead your mind instead of following it. And as he closed his eyes that night, he felt certain of one thing. Tomorrow he would rise again. Tomorrow he would lead again. Because greatness is not a single act. It is a daily decision. And he had finally chosen to become the kind of man who leads himself before he leads anything else. Engaging hook. Every person reaches a stage in life where the world tries to test their commitment. Not their talent. Not their intelligence. Their commitment. It comes in the form of unexpected challenges, moments of pressure, and situations that shake your confidence. In those moments you do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your discipline. And what you do next reveals the truth about who you are becoming. That is where the story continues. Part 5. The next morning arrived with a soft gray sky that looked peaceful but somehow carried the weight of a challenge. He opened his eyes slowly and felt a familiar resistance trying to pull him back into comfort. The warmth of the blankets. The quiet room. The soft invitation to stay just a little longer. But he caught himself before slipping into old habits. This was the moment that mattered. The first victory of the day. He sat up and placed his feet firmly on the floor. A calm breath filled his lungs. Napoleon Hill once wrote that a burning desire must be followed by definite action, or it will fade away like smoke. He knew that if he gave in to comfort now, he would weaken the foundation he had been building. So he stood tall and walked to the kitchen, letting the morning air sharpen his focus. He poured himself a glass of water and felt the coldness slide through him like a reminder that he was alive and capable. As he drank, he replayed yesterday's victories in his mind. They were small but powerful. Moments of self-command that had strengthened something inside him. Discipline is like a muscle. It grows when you use it. It weakens when you ignore it. He moved into his morning routine with purpose. A few stretches. Slow breathing. A quiet moment of reflection. Then he opened his journal again. The blank page welcomed him like an old friend. He wrote down his goals for the day. 3 goals only. He learned that clarity thrives in simplicity. Too many objectives scatter the mind. 3 clear objectives focus it. He asked the same 3 questions that had become his compass. What do I want? Why do I want it? What must I do today to move closer? The answers flowed from him with more confidence than before. His handwriting felt stronger too. It was as if each letter carried a portion of his new identity. The identity of someone who leads his mind instead of obeying it. As he left his home and stepped into the morning light, he felt a subtle shift inside him. The world looked the same, but he did not feel the same. Every step felt intentional. Every breath felt like preparation. The day ahead was not an obstacle. It was an opportunity. But it did not take long for the first test to appear. When he reached work, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. People were rushing. Conversations carried a sharp tone. A problem had surfaced overnight, something unexpected that demanded attention. He could feel the tension rising in the air. And for a moment he felt a flicker of stress inside him too. Old patterns were ready to return. The quick frustration. The hurried panic. The emotional reaction that tries to take control before you can think. But this time he caught it. He paused. He remembered his morning commitment. Lead your mind or your mind will lead you. He took a slow breath and reminded himself that problems are not punishments. They are opportunities to practice mastery. He walked toward the issue with a calm presence that surprised even him. He listened carefully to the details. He asked questions. And instead of letting emotion take over, he focused on one thing only. What must be done. In that moment he realized a profound truth. Strength is not loud. It is not intense. Real strength is quiet. It is controlled. It is the steady hand that directs the mind through turbulence. He worked through the problem step by step. He did not rush. He did not complain. He simply did the next right thing. And slowly the chaos around him began to settle. Solutions appeared. The tension faded. And for the first time others around him looked at him with a new kind of respect. It was not respect for his position. It was respect for his presence. People trust those who remain calm under pressure. They follow those who can think clearly when others panic. And that day he became the kind of person others began to rely on. Later during his lunch break he sat outside and reflected on what had happened. A gentle breeze brushed against his face. The sky had cleared into a soft blue. He realized that his victory was not in solving the problem. His victory was in mastering himself while solving it. Napoleon Hill often wrote that the greatest battles are fought within. That truth finally made sense. He had not conquered the day by force. He had conquered it by clarity. As the afternoon continued he kept that same focus. Whenever emotions tried to interfere he paused. Whenever doubt tried to whisper he dismissed it. Whenever discomfort tried to push him off track he reminded himself of his purpose. And with each disciplined choice he felt himself becoming stronger. When the workday ended he walked home with a steady calm in his chest. The sun was setting, painting the sky with golden streaks. The air carried the scent of evening. He felt tired in the best possible way. Not drained. Not defeated. But fulfilled. He had proven something to himself. A truth that Napoleon Hill taught many years ago. The person who controls his thoughts becomes the person who controls his destiny. And now he understood that destiny is shaped not by one dramatic moment, but by a series of choices made with discipline and clarity. Back home, he prepared a simple dinner and sat quietly at the table. No television. No noise. Just the quiet presence of his own thoughts. He felt a deeper connection with himself than ever before. A trust he had never fully nurtured. A belief that he was capable of more than he once imagined. Before bed he opened his journal again. He reviewed the goals he wrote in the morning. He had completed all 3. But what mattered more was the person he had become while completing them. A person who leads himself. A person who acts from conviction, not emotion. He wrote a single sentence on the final line of the page. I am becoming the master of my mind. And as he closed the journal he felt a quiet certainty settle inside him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tomorrow would bring new tests. But he was ready for them, because a person who wins the battle within can face anything outside with calm courage. And he knew that he was no longer the man he used to be. He was becoming the person he was meant to become. One disciplined choice at a time. Engaging hook. There comes a moment in every person's journey when the real transformation begins. It does not start when life becomes easy. It begins when you finally understand that no one is coming to lift you, guide you, or save you. It begins when you accept full responsibility for the direction of your life. Once that realization takes root inside you, everything changes. The final chapter of this journey starts right here. Part 6. Final part. The morning of his final test arrived quietly. There was no dramatic sky, no powerful storm, no sign that anything unusual was about to happen. Yet he felt something different inside. A stillness. A clarity. A steady pulse of confidence that had not existed in him just a few weeks earlier. He stood in front of the mirror for a moment. His reflection was the same man, but not the same spirit. His eyes held a deeper understanding. Life no longer felt like something happening to him. It felt like something he was shaping with intention and discipline. He remembered a line from Napoleon Hill that had stayed with him. The person who masters his mind becomes the master of his world. He understood it now. Not in theory, but in experience. Every day he had been fighting small invisible battles inside himself. Moments of weakness. Moments of fear. Moments where old habits tried to rise again. And each time he chose discipline over emotion, he carved a new identity within himself. He walked into his morning routine with a sense of purpose. The cold water that touched his face felt like a symbol of awakening. The slow breathing grounded him. The quiet time in the early hours reminded him that the world cannot shake a person who is steady from the inside. He wrote in his journal again. 3 goals. Clear, simple, and meaningful. He felt calm, as if he was preparing for something he had been meant to face for a long time. When he arrived at work, he sensed immediately that something was wrong. A major issue had erupted overnight. A decision needed to be made quickly, and everyone was waiting for someone else to take the lead. Stress vibrated in the room. People spoke sharply, moved quickly, and reacted emotionally. It was the kind of moment that once would have overwhelmed him. But not today. This time he stepped forward. Not with pride, not with force, but with the quiet authority of someone who had learned to rule himself first. He listened carefully to the problem. He asked questions not from fear but from clarity. He saw the situation not as a burden but as an opportunity to prove to himself that he had truly changed. He began guiding the team toward possible solutions. His voice was calm. His presence steady. He did not allow the tension of the room to influence his mind. Instead, he influenced the room with his clarity. Slowly the chaos softened. Confusion turned into direction. Panic turned into strategy. People who had never looked to him for leadership were now following his ideas with trust. It surprised them. But it did not surprise him. Leadership is not granted by title. It is earned through mastery of self. People naturally follow those who do not lose themselves when pressure arrives. The problem took hours to resolve, but eventually a solution emerged. The team was relieved. They thanked him. They praised him. Yet something inside him had changed so deeply that the praise no longer affected him in the way it once had. It felt good, yes, but it did not define him. It did not guide him. It did not control him. He remembered an important truth. Praise can be as dangerous as criticism if you allow it to become your fuel. Real strength comes from inner clarity, not outer applause. And he had finally reached that point. Later he walked outside during his break. The air felt warm. The sunlight rested gently on his face. He took a deep breath and felt gratitude rise within him. Not for the solved problem, but for the person he had become through the struggle. He realized something that Napoleon Hill had always taught. The world does not reward those who hope. It rewards those who act from purpose. He understood that external challenges were never the true enemy. The real enemy had always been his own mind, his own emotions, his own lack of discipline. And by mastering the inner battle, he had unlocked a power that could never be taken from him. As he walked home that evening, the world looked more open, more possible, more alive. The sunset painted the sky in vibrant colors. Cars passed by. People talked and laughed. Life moved around him. But inside he felt a stillness, a certainty. He knew he had crossed a silent bridge inside himself. The man who began this journey was gone. A stronger, clearer version had emerged. That night he sat with his journal one more time. The room was quiet. A soft lamp glowed beside him. He wrote slowly, thoughtfully, with the confidence of someone who finally understood his own strength. He wrote a truth that had become clear through every test. No one is coming to save you. But that is not a curse. It is the greatest blessing. Because it means your future belongs to you. Your growth belongs to you. Your destiny belongs to you. He closed the journal and felt a calm settle deep inside. He was no longer waiting for the world to change. He was no longer waiting for permission. He was no longer waiting for motivation. He had become the kind of person who creates his own direction. He realized that discipline is not punishment. It is love in its highest form. The love you give yourself when you refuse to settle for a lesser version of your life. As he turned off the light, he knew his journey was not ending. It was just beginning. But now he had the tools, the clarity, and the courage to walk it with intention. He understood one final truth. The person who owns his morning owns his mind. The person who owns his mind owns his day. And the person who owns his day, again and again, becomes the person who owns his life. He whispered to himself before falling asleep. I am ready. And this time he meant it. Call to action. If this story inspired you, make sure to subscribe, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps these messages reach more people who need them. Stay strong, stay focused, and keep becoming the best version of yourself.